So we have this idea after 9/11, the president shreds the Constitution, and we end up imprisoning, detaining people wrongly, because the Constitution was made in recognition that human beings are fallible. They can overreach. They put in institutional structures that would try to blunt the more degraded elements of mankind and their ambitions. And I want to focus on the war power, because that's the one that has been most abused, vivisected, tortured, mangled by administrations in the last decades. Now, it's always, remember the doctrine of original intent, which I think is a sound one. You try to interpret the Constitution not as a homonym of what it was. Sounds the same, means the opposite. But really, what the Founding Fathers intended it to mean and to accomplish. And if there are defects, you amend it, like we have 28 times. Indeed, perhaps our most important amendments were the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. You know, the Founding Fathers didn't say, well, the judges can make it up as they go along. We needed to amend the document. Now, what was enshrined into the memories of the Founding Fathers was the inclination of executives everywhere in the world to fight wars for the sake of domination and control by itself. War for the sake of war. Most people find that rather unusual, but that's the human species is that way, like a lot of other species. We just get a psychic thrill out of domination, even if it makes you less safe, less wealthy. And all during the decades before 1776, when the Founding Fathers looked out at Europe, all they found, the wars, endless wars, the British Empire fighting endless wars for no purpose whatsoever. Indeed, Edmund Burke was advising very presciently. He said, we are acquiring new territories, not only North America, but South Africa, Burma, India is expanding. He said, you know what? This is going to be the ruination of us, because I dread, Burke said, that we will be too much dreaded. We will come to believe we can't abuse our power, and we will come to destroy ourselves. He was not heeded, and the British destroyed themselves. The Founding Fathers grew up with this enlightenment. Edmund Burke was one of their gospel speakers with Adam Smith. I hope we've all read Wealth of Nations. It's an equally important lodestar for our domestic policy. So they feared one thing: executive authority to get the country into war. This was universally held, whether it was Alexander Hamilton, who was someone who was for a strong executive, or James Wilson, the first Justice of the Supreme Court, James Iredell, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Everyone agreed we cannot have a dispensation that enables the executive to initiate warfare. Every single statement made at the Constitutional Convention, every single statement made in state ratification debates, no executive can rush us into war. We need to put clogs on the artery of war. Not because we were cowards. We wanted to have a strong, invincible defense. That was Richard Goodloe Harper's millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. But because they knew war had two elements that were a little bit frightening. One, it makes legal what's customarily murder. Now, sometimes you have to go that far, but you need to have something really serious to change that legal framework. The second is, in times of war, the executive becomes the law. The rule of law is no longer king, the executive is. Because the nature of war, that secrecy comes, the power, the fame, the money, the taxes, the contracts, it's all in the executive branch. And that's what they wrote: we cannot have an executive with the authority to get us into war. And George Washington, the very first president, he in fact presided over the Constitutional Convention, himself stated in office, only the Congress can authorize the initiation of offensive warfare. Of course, the Constitution recognized that when you're attacked at Pearl Harbor, you can respond. We're talking about the initiation of warfare. And the reason why the difference is enormous is that when you respond to an actual attack, you have ocular evidence of danger. You don't have to worry about the president concocting weapons of mass destruction or Japanese-American sabotage or whatever to try to justify the use of the military. You have ocular evidence. You don't have that with this preemptive war. Oh, something dangerous is happening. It's all secret. I'm the only one who knows. Just trust me. Just trust me, you know, like the second attack that didn't occur. of Vietnam. And not only Washington, when Thomas Jefferson came in and he fought the Barbary pirates, he had authorization, 10 congressional statutes. James Madison went, the War of 1812, only Congress can decide whether to enter war or not. And not only that, Chief Justice John Marshall, who is heralded for his famous decision, Marbury and Madison, he fought with Washington. As Chief Justice, he wrote opinions clearly indicating Congress was supreme over the president. This is during the Adams administration, when you might call it a quasi-war with France, and deciding what war tactics were appropriate and what were not. Universally understood. John Quincy Adams, who was the son of John Adams, the 6th president of the United States, the last of the founding generation, gave a magnificent July 4th, 1821 address. He was then Secretary of State to James Monroe. We do not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We could become the dictatress of the world, but we would destroy our republic as a result, because all checks and balances vanish in times of war. And we can see that today. Who stands up and says anything, the president? He just says national security. Okay, we don't want to second guess it. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. They all are cowed. Oh, you're weak on terror. Go ahead. Then do what you want to do. John Ashcroft, when he was promoting the Patriot Act, said anybody who criticizes us is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. No, we are infallible. We got it perfectly. This is before the 3,200 violations the FBI made in executing these so-called administrative subpoenas to get our business records. 3,200, no demerits, no sanctions, no censure. The violations come so routinely, we get numb to them. Numb to them. We have now a situation where the president invokes state secrets doctrine. Now, where is that in the Constitution, state secrets doctrine? Now, it makes the law really an oxymoron, because the doctrine is intended to be an engine of injustice. It says, if you're the victim of a constitutional violation, like being killed, being tortured, being arbitrarily detained for years, you can't win your case. If in order to prevail, you have to show that the culprit was an intelligence agent or there was some security cooperation with a foreign government. It sort of creates an incentive then to commit constitutional wrongs, because you're shielded from any retaliation. Shielded. Now, what's wrong? It used to be the case that if the government had a really important national security secret, and that was true after World War II. When we broke the atomic spies at Los Alamos, there was someone called David Hall, who we knew was complicit because we had cracked the Soviet code called Venona. And in order to avoid alerting the Soviet Union that we'd cracked the code, we decided not to prosecute him. But we said, it's too important for the national security to prosecute. Well, if it's too important to disclose your evidence to someone who's a victim of constitutional violation to the country, then you should claim you've got a default judgment. You should be able to get compensated and redressed. You don't tell them you lose, because we're an empire. Because we're an empire. And that's really where we need to come back to the Constitution and the philosophy of the Founding Fathers that I think we have abandoned. I would hope that all, whether you call yourself conservative or liberal, would embrace. The first and perhaps most important that was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that the center of the universe in the United States is the individual in freedom, not an American empire. Now that is why we call this the American Revolution. It was the document for the first time in history said that the purpose of government is to secure unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, period, end point, nothing further. That exhausts the proper role of government. That's the purpose. The second thing it said that was revolutionary was that we the people are sovereign, those three words. We the people of the United States. The sovereignty is in us, not in the executive branch, it's not in the Congress, it's in us. They have no power that we haven't given to them. They have no power that we haven't given them. Now, the third element in their revolutionary thinking was to recognize that they were not there as Don Quixotes to reform the whole world. Not because they were callous, but they knew that endeavor would destroy the internal dynamics that made us a republic. And therefore, they wrote in the Constitution that the mission of the constitutional endeavor was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Not to Afghanis, Zimbabweans, we wish them well, but it is not our mission. We have no moral obligation to run abroad and save people because they can't organize a government the way that we have. Our mission is to defend the United States, period. And the Founding Fathers acted on that premise. Shortly after we prevailed over the British, there were revolutions that were run in Central and South American, Spanish tyranny, Portuguese. We did not, we observed, we said, we wish you well. We didn't intervene, we stayed neutral. We stayed neutral. It's not that people can't volunteer. Maybe they can get Nobel Prizes and we could celebrate their humanitarianism. But the fact is, when government gets into that business, it necessarily turns the country into a tyranny, because that's what military warfare does. In times of war, the law is silent. Cicero said it. It hasn't changed since then. Now, what does this mean with regard to the post-9/11 dispensation? First of all, we don't glamorize these thugs as warriors. They're criminals, and we should treat them as criminals. We treated Mr. Moussaoui, this 20th hijacker, as a criminal. He was tried as civilian court across the river. We have passed the Classified Information Procedures Act that enables us to prosecute terrorists without disclosing national security secrets. Since 9/11, we've had 200 convictions in terrorism cases and 3 military commission trials. Actually, there only 1 trial, 2 pled guilty. And those are the so-called the worst of the worst. Just think how we're warping our institutions for so little. Never have so many been so frightened over such an insubstantial threat to our existential existence. One of the military commission's cases, David Hicks, I call him the Australian Che Guevara. He's a lost guy. He goes to Afghanistan. He trains in a training camp there. Never threatens an American. We sentenced him to 9 months in prison. He serves time there. He's free now. Second military commission defendant is Hamdan. Hamdan is the driver of Osama bin Laden. Now I thought, well, let me review the Nuremberg trials. Let's see if they got Adolf Hitler's chef and the driver on the Autobahn there, right? No, didn't do that. Let's try him in civilian. He gets 5 months. He's already free in Yemen, that now new breeding ground of terrorists. The third one, Balul, his case is still on appeal. He was tried and convicted for making a recruiting video that was utilized over in Afghanistan, and actually you can find it on Google at present. Now, it didn't constitute incitement under the Supreme Court rulings, Brandenburg and Ohio, for those of you who know your Supreme Court decisions. That is required to have speech lose First Amendment protection. There's no showing that somebody who watched the video then turned around and felt it was encouraging them to kill Americans. But this is sort of reverse Google in the United States. We have not a trial in the civilian court. He's a military. It's a war crime now to exercise free speech abroad if you're not an American citizen, which is what the United States has argued. As the case goes up on appeal, it may actually get to the United States Supreme Court. Now, what do we do now? What do we do now is we the people. There's only one way, in my judgment, that things are going to change. And we have got to organize. We've got to insist that Congress recapture its powers, that it's all surrendered. And we cannot be discouraged with the fact that it looks like a huge uphill battle. Because the fact that our voices are relatively lonely, I would say. Because the American empire has indoctrinated the American people from day one into thinking we have to go everywhere. We're obliged. We are the superpower of the world. We bring liberty, freedom, greatness, superiority, and safety by sending the military abroad, never asking why. Never asking, well, is that what our founding documents intended our mission to be? And it's a matter of speaking, protesting, but never compromising principles. This idea, in my judgment, if you want real change, well, you all have to compromise your principles and get together. Hey, that maybe works if you're looking about striking a deal. But if you want to change the country, no way. That first person who stood up and said, slavery is bad. I was born in Arlington. That person was William Lloyd Garrison in Boston. And he stood up and said with his Liberator newspaper, slavery is bad. You're crazy. This is 1831. It'll never happen. But he was there when the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery was ratified. So we can never be discouraged. The process itself, knowing we're speaking for the highest principles, the loftiest endeavors of the Founding Fathers, has to be its own reward. Obviously, we want to say progress, but we never give up principles. Abraham Lincoln said on his way to the White House after having been elected in 1860, when he was discussing his view of the need for the Union to remain intact, "Sooner than surrender these principles, I would be assassinated upon this spot." This is he's speaking in New York. Cooper's Union. He said that without knowing what lied ahead. That's the same attitude that we have to have. And we will go down in history. We want to be like Winston Churchill. This was our finest hour. Thank you.
But I kind of wanted to chant "Run, Bruce, run."
Be careful what you wish for.
All right. You heard it here first, folks. Finally, we have Jacob Hornberger, and you've seen his name as the co-editor of several books. He's the founder and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which is based near here in Fairfax, Virginia. Please welcome Jacob Hornberger.
I'd like to share with you 4 reasons why conservatives should reject the war on terror, including the swampland of imperialism and interventionism from which this war has spawned. Reason 1, fiscal responsibility. Every conservative believes in fiscal responsibility. You know, what do we have? We have out-of-control federal spending. Every one of you right now is starting out your lives $40,000 in debt. That's your share of the debt that this government has imposed on you. And they're just getting started. They got a credit card that is drawn on your account that has no limit. And they're just getting started. Family of 4 has a debt of $160,000. And that's to fund, in large part, all these foreign escapades. And guess who's financing this debt? That would be the Chinese Communist regime. Now, I know one thing about conservatives. Conservatives hate communists. Okay? That's what the Cold War was all about. That's what the Vietnam War was about. That's what the Korean War was all about. And yet now our government is in hock to one of the most brutal communist regimes in history to fund this imperialism and interventionism. How much more disgraceful and despicable could you get than that? And guess how they're going to pay off this debt? You see, you already see them cranking up the printing presses. And that's, of course, where the Federal Reserve comes in. You guys, you've heard of the Federal Reserve. That's what they've done since 1913. Every time they go on these spending binges, they just start printing the money. And it's a default. They're defaulting on the debt by paying the creditors in debased dollars. And when the prices start rising across the board in response to this devalued currency, you're going to see the liberals start crying against greed and the bankers and the big businessmen that are raising their prices. Because they're not going to know that it's government that's behind this. Debasing the currency, then come the price controls, the long lines, the rationing, everything that is antithetical to what conservatives believe. in terms of sound money and free enterprise, free markets. This is the cost of empire and interventionism. Debt, spending, taxes, and inflation. All the things that conservatives are against with respect to their devotion to fiscal responsibility. Two, all this war on terrorism and interventionism and imperialism is making us less safe as Americans, less secure. And conservatives stand for security. They stand for safety. They believe in these things. Every time the troops kill somebody new, every week, whether it's a bunch of children because of some misguided missile, or their mother, or even just the people, you know, a guy that's on his wedding day and he gets his bride bombed on their wedding day and killed, or even the guys that are just defending their country against invaders, something that we would be likely to do if, say, China invaded America. They've got friends, they got relatives, and those people, the survivors, or the people who are killed or maimed, they get angry. I mean, that's human nature. You know, if somebody comes over here to the United States and kills a bunch of Americans, Americans get angry and they want vengeance. That's human nature. It's human nature all over the world. Now, conservatives stand for national defense, right? I mean, haven't we heard that for decades? Strong national defense, strong national defense. Okay. Let's bring all the troops home from all those hundreds of countries where they're stationed, out of Iraq, out of Afghanistan, immediately bring them home. Let's defend. You see, the advantage of this is that, okay, sure, there's still going to be some people angry over what happened to them this past year, in the last 8 years, and the last 20 years with sanctions and embargoes. Well, we can deal with that. Detection, apprehension, and so forth. But the advantage of this approach of defense is that you're not killing new people over there that is fueling the ranks of people that are angry and rageful against us. And over time, the anger and rage diminishes. And then those who would devote their lives to violence can't get any recruits. Because that's what this interventionism and imperialism has done. It has become the greatest terrorist-producing machine in history. Number three, the Constitution. Every conservative believes in the Constitution. Right now on the internet, there's something circulating called Mount Vernon Statement. And conservatives are going there in droves, sign up. And you know what it says? We believe in the Constitution and we stand by the Constitution. That's great. But you see, ever since 9/11, all we have seen is violations of the Constitution under the guise of this war on terrorism. And you got, 2 invasions of countries with no declaration of war by Congress. Now, some people say that's just a technicality. It's not a technicality. It's the law. It's the law. Or they'll say something, well, no, when Congress authorizes the president to use force to go find the people that committed a terrorist attack, that's like a declaration of war. No, it isn't. It's the law. It's the law that we, the people, impose on them, and they're required to obey it, just like they require us to obey the laws that they put on us. Since 9/11, we've got the Patriot Act, which authorizes these people to issue warrants that would make even King George embarrassed. General warrants, secret warrants. You've got them making illegal secret deals with the telecoms and who knows who else, where they're violating the privacy rights that are encompassed, for example, by the 9th Amendment that conservatives believe in. You've got the suspension of habeas corpus, the linchpin of a free society. You've got the denigration of trial by jury, due process of law that goes all the way back to Magna Carta, which conservatives cite in their speeches and their articles. So you see, what you have here is a war on terrorism that is violating the thing that conservatives hold dear, the Constitution. Now, some people say, oh, well, we can do both. We can have the war on terrorism, we can protect the Constitution. That's just nonsense. That's like saying, well, you know, we can have lightning, but no thunder. You know, you don't need to worry about that. In fact, one of the things I find most fascinating is how some conservatives have supported this camp at Guantanamo from the very beginning. Because you see, the purpose, the specific purpose of putting this thing at Guantanamo was to avoid the Constitution. This was designed to be a Constitution-free zone. Now, I ask you, how can you support and defend the Constitution when you're trying to figure out ways to avoid the Constitution? You know? When you believe in principles, and we believe in these principles that were bequeathed to us through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, then you want to see those principles applied universally. When you go into another country, you say, hey, these are good principles, and they should apply here too. And so that's why they have to make a choice. War on terrorism or the Constitution, which is more important. Now, the fourth reason is the most important of all. And it encompasses the first three and much more. And that fourth reason is individual liberty. You see, James Madison put it best. Now, Madison's one of the founding fathers. Conservatives love founding fathers. We know that. And he's the father of the Constitution. Here's what Madison says. Of all the threats to liberty, the biggest one is war. You see? Because he points out that war encompasses all the rest of them. The out-of-control spending, making the nation less safe, less secure, less free. And so you're putting it into an interesting position in this thing, conservatives are. Do you favor this enemy of liberty? Or do you favor what it's warring against, individual freedom? Because you see, this is what Randolph Bourne was saying, that war is the health of the state. This is where you get the centralization of power, the bureaucracies, the self-important militarists. You know, everything's like the Roman Empire. That, oh, wow, the empire's in danger away thousands of miles away. And everything is centered around the glorification of the state. That's antithetical to the concept of individual liberty. And so we have to ask ourselves, what's your choice? Now, if you want empire, if you think this is all great, that this is the world's sole remaining empire, and you want to project militarism across the world, fine. But don't sit here and pretend with your mantra that you favor free enterprise, private property, and limited government, which is the favorite conservative mantra. But if you favor liberty, which of course is this concept of free enterprise, private property, and limited government, then you have no choice but to call for the dismantling of this enemy of liberty, this huge warfare state that has come into existence. Now, I would be unmindful if I did not mention that obviously this is not, the warfare state is not the only source of our problems in this country. There is the welfare state, you know, the welfarism that Roosevelt foisted upon us many decades ago. So you've got this double-barrel challenge here, that in order to achieve the free society, we have to dismantle not just the welfare state, but the warfare state as well. And by doing that, that's how we restore sound money to our society. That's how we restore conservative values, voluntary charity, unlimited accumulation of wealth, free markets, natural harmonies between people. This morality, this is how we restore the values that conservatives have always held dear. By restoring a republic and a free market, we restore the idea of a free society, a prosperous society, and a naturally functioning society. Thank you very much.
Let's take some questions now, and to take as many as possible, please try to keep your questions brief, to the point, and make sure that they are questions. We've got 2 microphones here in the front. Yes, go ahead.
I just have noticed one factor missing and just was wondering what your response would be. Based on founders' quotes and philosophies, where does God fit into the equation of those freedoms and things you've just mentioned?
Anybody want to take that? There's microphones.
What was the, could you, oh.
Where does God fit into this picture of liberty?
Well, I think the Founding Fathers were quite clear in Article 6 that this was a secular country. There was to be no test oath, that we would be open to all freedoms, but Jesus said, render unto Caesar things that are Caesar, and under God things that are God, and that has no place in our government and politics.
Gentleman there, go ahead.
How do we get rid of 750 bases, dismantle the military-industrial complex, do all of these things now that we've created this monster of terrorism, all this hatred against the United States? How do we dismantle our national security apparatus and remain safe?
Well, that's kind of a double-barreled question. I would say you have to starve the beast, and that might happen whether we want it to or not, because of the situation in our economy. The problem is don't think of this in terms of something that's keeping you safe. This is a huge bureaucracy that's feeding directly off of your blood, and there's no other way to look at it. And basically, Americans have to wake up someday and say, this is something that does not work, that is not in our national interest, and we have to change this. You are secure and you are safe by most considerations, by most ways of measuring that. And it's an exaggeration to say that we're constantly threatened. This is fear-mongering, and this is precisely what these people want to do, precisely because it's filling their pockets.
Could I just add, risks are relative, and since 9/11, there have been about 160,000 murders in the United States. We don't declare war on murder and bring in military state and have military commissions. We don't celebrate them, but we prosecute. We did that with Timothy McVeigh, even domestic terrorists. And I say those are tragedies in life, but they have to be accepted if you're going to have liberty and freedom. We cannot move to a risk-free society and remain an American republic.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Just add one other quick thing. The beast, starving the beast is important, starving it of finances, of the blood. But also, we need to stop glorifying military service, government service. To the extent that you can do something as an individual person, you can help educate others that the government is not something to be in awe of, and certainly the defense bureaucracy is definitely not something to be in awe of. It's not something to serve. It's a parasite, and it needs to be, we kind of educate people that way. So not just the tax dollars and the money that it's spending, but don't give it any credit.
My name is Forrest Jalick, and I'm from Chicago. Don't blame me, I wrote in Ron Paul. So, that's the truth. I have it's kind of a question, but kind of a statement for the whole audience here. And I'm looking for some insight. I'm a classical liberal, as many of you here are. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the military members that are in here. Absolutely, we should probably give them a round of applause. All right. The last couple of wars that we've had, I'm a research scientist in this field, have been centered around energy security, and this is something pretty dear to my heart. Currently, the world's known petroleum reserves are between 1.2 to 1.4 trillion barrels. The world consumes 85 million barrels a day, the United States being 20% of that, 365 days a year, with an outlay of about $500 billion a year that we send out to foreign lands because we don't have enough here. Our current rate of production to consumption will have us depleted nationally in 12 years. That's just the known reserves. This is something, regardless of the war that we're fighting now, or we have fought before, that's even if we draw it out tomorrow, we got the military out of the Middle East, that we're gonna have to face, and that's a national energy policy that's coherent and that does not change on 4 and 8 year cycles. And this will drive, that impetus will drive us to fight more wars, that resource war and others. My question to you, being a classical liberal, is, and the rest of the audience here, is what do we do and how do we get our government to stop staggering around drunk with an energy policy that's going to drive these conflicts?
I don't really think that energy policy is what creates the American empire's incentive for war. You know, we didn't fight the Mexican-American War over oil. Afghanistan doesn't have virtually anything there. It's like rubble. Even with the Arab oil embargo in '73, we always got our oil. You just had middlemen buy it. You can't have embargoes that succeed. And I think it's a mistake to think that we can avoid focusing on this idea. We're just projecting military power for its own sake, which is, in my judgment, what we're doing. And get away from that adolescent thrill. We're just the big guy on the block and say, no, we're American Republicans, we're mature adults, and we want liberty more than empire is what it's all about.
No, and I absolutely agree with you. The way we've done this has been wrong, but I know that these last 2 wars have been energy-based, and I don't agree with it. I don't agree.
We got to move on. We got to get more questions in. Thanks. Go ahead.
Hi. Now that we are engaged in Afghanistan, my question is based around the current rules of engagement there, based for the individual soldier on the ground. He's been ordered there, and he's doing the best he can. But today, if our men are taking incoming fire, they cannot return fire unless they see a person with a weapon where that fire is coming from. So after a one-sided firefight, the enemy hides the weapon, walks out of the building, laughs at our soldiers, and walks away. This is costing our soldiers their lives. To what end?
Do you have a question?
That is the question. To what end? I mean, how do we change that? Where's that policy coming from?
Does anybody want to?
The answer to that is not to be there in the first place.
Well, yeah, but okay, yeah, that's easy.
Go ahead. Did you want to add something? Did you want to add something, Karen?
As you're describing this catch-22 situation, which is incredibly ludicrous, yet it is true. I understand what you're saying. That in itself is an example of why this whole thing is so stupid. Why are we in this? I mean, this should be advertised as stupidity and used as justification to end this stupidity. It's not like you can say, oh, let's make it so it's better for them to fight. The whole thing's wrong, okay? So they shouldn't be doing it.
You want to go ahead? Sorry, we have to move on. So we have too many people waiting for questions. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. One,
can you try to make it one if you can? We've got a lot of people waiting to ask questions.
I agree that everything we've done in this conflict has been wrong, but since this is a movement about ideas and education, why isn't there anybody on this panel talking about the idea of the ideology of totalitarian Islamism? And my second, I mean, you said, quoted Sun Tzu, know thy enemy. And the second question is, if you want to believe what Osama bin Laden said about Norway, I mean, are you willing to look American Muslims in the eye and say that Osama bin Laden is right when he says that he is practicing true Islam?
Yeah. Anybody want to take that?
Your question illustrates why the United States is here to secure the blessings of liberty to Americans and our posterity. We may encourage them to practice what the democracy is, act in our image if they wish to. But we aren't smart enough to know why everybody around the world may act as they want to act. And we have criminal laws against it, so if they attack us, we will destroy them and apply our criminal law. It's not as though the choice is between either having war or doing nothing. There are about 50,000
Well, that's what you're
intermediate
saying.
grades.
There's nobody advocating actually defending ourselves against. Let me interject here. I think it's important that we remind ourselves of the vision of the Founding Fathers and our American ancestors, which was so unique, I mean, so unusual. What they said, as Bruce said, is that, look, if you're suffering tyranny overseas, or oppression, or starvation, or famine, our government is not going to come and save you. We're not going to do anything to help you. But, and this is where conservatives have a blind spot, we will keep our borders open to you so that if you decide to escape your conditions, rest assured there is at least one nation in this world that will never forcibly repatriate you to this land of tyranny and oppression. And that's where the integration of this vision, our government won't come to save you, but our policy of open immigration will provide a refuge for you.
Your answer really is the rule of law is what discredits the radical Islamists. They don't believe in the rule of law. Thomas Paine said in Common Sense, in the United States, the rule of law is king, the king is not law. That's good enough to defeat anybody.
And I would add that there's a tendency in the United States to want to think in terms of bumper stickers. And Islamofascism is one of those expressions. There are 1.3 billion Muslims, and they come in all colors, shapes, and varieties, and they think in many different ways. Some of them are radicalized, and most of them are not. It's a big mistake to be looking for a boogeyman to explain our own failings, explain our own pathologies, and basically we would be a lot better off right now if we would just leave everybody else alone.
My name is Jim Russell. I'm a congressional candidate from Westchester County, New York. And my opponent is Nita Lowey, who is the chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee, one of the persons who's responsible for the billions of dollars of military aid that gets sent over to the Middle East. And she has the support of an organization called AIPAC, which is very powerful. I know every Washington's birthday, and this Monday coming up, Washington's farewell address is read in the Congress, but I don't think the ears are open. How can we deal with this tremendous influence of AIPAC that is pushing an interventionist philosophy?
In the United States, still, if you organize and you voice your opposition, it counts. I was in Congress the first day the House of Representatives voted against the crazy TARP bill, and then they changed their mind. But the reason why they changed, and even Jim McDermott, as in the office of Washington, a liberal, voted against it because people called on the phone, they sent emails, they sent telegrams and said, don't do it. That's how the system works in the United States. My baptism here was Watergate. And the reason why Watergate brought Nixon down is because the American people said, we don't believe if the president does it, it's legal. And they screamed and yelled, and that's why we had Watergate committees, and that's why we got a special prosecutor, and that's why when Nixon fired on the Saturday Night Massacre, Richardson and Ruckelshaus, he almost was immediately impeached. It's not easy, but that is the way you do it. Don't just consign yourself to these people look like they're powerful, they're never going to be defeated. You know, we would have lost Massachusetts against Martha Coakley if we took that attitude. It doesn't mean that we should be Pollyannish, but that's the only way. Ground root support, thoughtful writing and letters, they'll pay attention, stand up, devote your energies to civic responsibilities. Yeah.
And also I would point out that if we had a non-interventionist foreign policy, groups like AIPAC would wither and die.
With the recent piece in Harper's about the cover-up of the 3 suicides in Guantanamo Bay and the possibility of it being a murder, what is the likelihood and the implications, if any, if that was to be taken to court?
Well, remember, the criminal law in the United States can only be enforced by the executive branch. Now, we've already seen the Obama administration deciding they don't want to prosecute torture or anything else. I think the likelihood is 0 or in negative integers that there'd be a prosecution. Now, when you come to what would happen if the case got into court, just suppose that it did happen despite the political realities, would there be possibilities of defenses? Most people don't understand that the law, the Constitution, builds in what they would style a mistake of law defense. If somebody in good faith believes they're acting pursuant to law, they step over the line, that is defense to a criminal prosecution. It happened in Watergate, for instance. But even in the military, you're required to disobey a knowingly false order, even in the military. And it seems hard to believe that killing somebody who is in detention would ever satisfy that, that claim of necessity or justification to avoid some kind of punishment. But there can always be extenuating circumstances. That's why we need to recognize the Constitution builds in the flexibility. There's the pardon power if it seems too harsh and someone acted under great strain or whatever. But I say that's doing it according to process. I come back, due process is the most important thing to keeping civilization alive. We can never underestimate the importance of procedural regularity, whatever the outcome.
Great. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Pericles. I'm with the Student Liberty Front from Philadelphia. Thank you. Okay, first I want to caution everybody on the usage of the word we. I think, personally, I don't like to get lumped in as a supporter of empire and get blamed for something I never did. But my question is that do you think the past 200 years of sort of world empire from the Spanish-American War are a result of the monopoly that we have on the state's use of force, in that the U.S. Constitution guarantees a state-sponsored monopoly to the U.S. military, keeping them non-subject from any competition whatsoever. We give them trillions in tax dollars and then are surprised when they have lots of big weapons and go around blowing everybody up. And,
does anyone want to take that?
I don't, you know, yeah, there shouldn't be a standing army, for sure. Your question is, what, you know, we fund, again, it's the parasite thing. You know, if you're going to make a big fat tick, it's going to take space up, okay? And this is what this does. Yes, if you have, and who was it? Who was it, Clinton or somebody? No, Madeleine Albright.
You have a big army.
Yeah, she said, what is the point of giving you all these things if you're never going to use them? She was talking about Bosnia and some things she wanted to do there with these toys. Yeah, part of it is having those toys, but the other part is the nature of the state. The nature of the state is to expand and to grow and to consolidate and to centralize. So, you know,
it's a monopoly.
It is.
But it's not the monopoly. You know, countries work by their cultural attitudes. The reason why is because we've lost the mission of the United States from having the individual the center of society and freedom and individual liberty to being an empire is the goal of the equation. In some sense, it got more acute after the Soviet Union disintegrated because we had then no restraints on being reckless and marching anywhere in the world and thinking that nothing's an existential threat, however bad we are. Culture will dominate institutions all of the time, no matter what the words are. That's what we got to focus on. That's why we got to be in the classrooms, to our kids, to our colleagues, or whatever. We don't want to be an empire. We don't want all that power. We want to be free and have a republic, and the individual is the center of society. We don't want togas and huge Roman colosseums that celebrated an empire like Rome.
All right, we only have time for one more question, unfortunately. So, go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm a little nervous just because it's an amazing consolidation of heroism all around me right now. And with the veterans in the front row and each of the individuals on the panel. I'm familiar with all your work through antiwar.com and Antiwar Radio. And my question for you guys is, with the anti-war rallies coming up on March 20th in D.C., San Francisco, and Los Angeles, they're organized by Marxist, Leninist, you know, sort of leftist ideology, and they've been extremely ineffective. So is there effort, or are any of you making any effort to be speakers at anti-war rallies that represent true peace?
That was our last question. Does anybody want to address that?
I tell you what, I don't make, I'm sorry to say I don't make efforts. When I get called to participate in things, if I can do it, I do it. But, you know, Short answer, no, I don't make the effort, and I'm not sure how much marching is important to certain sectors of change, but I think the big change is, like he mentioned, with culture, with the people that we know explaining and understanding how things work and how they ought to work, how they should work with our own history, human liberty at the center of what we're about, and educating everybody around us. We can all do that, and sometimes when you get together in big groups and it's all noisy and there's other types of excitement, people really aren't thinking any more than they are in Washington every day. So thinking is what we should do more, thinking and working with in our own realms of influence.
Great. Well, thanks very much to all of our panelists. It was great. Appreciate you all coming here. Thanks.